Hello, this is Archie Dunlop with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, May the 25th, 2023. Rolf Harris is dead. I don't know whether you've ever heard of Rolf Harris. I'm sure if you're British or Australian, you will have heard him, particularly if you're of a certain age. Rolf Harris dominated British television, from the 60s onwards. He was a talented musician. He was a talented artist, television personality. He painted a picture of the Queen. He was known for his charitable works. I was talking to someone a long time ago, and he said his wife was in hospital having, I think, some kidney treatment, and Rolf Harris turned up at the hospital, was giving patients his support. Everyone liked Rolf Harris. I saw some daytime television. I think it was on daytime television. He did this art show, and he was talking about Goya's the 3rd of May. Goya's most famous painting of these French soldiers shooting Spanish peasants. Famously, one of the peasants has got his arms up as he's about to be shot by the French soldiers. And Rolf Harris was talking about this painting, and he was in Spain, and he was kind of relating the painting to the actual inhabitants of the place he was visiting. And I thought it was really effective. I hadn't actually seen anyone do that before. To really analyze a painting, but in a very practical kind of way. I think he was actually painting it himself. I tried to find a video, but I couldn't find it. But yeah, everyone liked Rolf Harris. And then on March the 28th, 2013, he got arrested for sexually assaulting teenage minors. And I think the British nation was in shock. Here was this national treasure, someone who everyone liked, someone who was clearly very talented. And I think he ended up being sentenced to 5.5 years in prison for what he'd done. I think between the 1970s and the 80s. I don't know, but I don't want to go into the precise details of what he did. But yeah, it was a big shock. And now that he's dead, he died on May the 10th, and I want to look at his horoscope, with the usual question. Could one have seen the dark side of Rolf Harris's personality? This guy was a national treasure. Could we have seen something untoward in his horoscope? Or maybe not. I'm going to argue maybe not. It's unless one uses hindsight. And as I was saying yesterday with Charles Manson, it's all very well to look at a chart after you know that someone has committed horrific crimes. And yeah, sure, you can always find something. But what about beforehand? Can you really find anything that fits? So I'm going to be looking at his chart with that in my mind. What stands out as a problem in his chart? Is his chart that special in terms of seeing a problem area? As I said, I'm not convinced. Anyway, so let's look at Rolf Harris's chart. If you haven't heard of Rolf Harris, if you're not interested in Rolf Harris, that's not the point. I'm trying to illustrate astrology here. It's enough to know that he was incredibly talented. Everyone loved him, yet he had some dark secrets which eventually came out around 10 years before he died. So, looking at his chart, what is spectacular about Rolf Harris's chart is how many planets he's got in Aries. He has just got loads of planets in Aries. He's got Sun in Aries, Moon in Aries, Mercury in Aries, Venus in Aries, Uranus in Aries. So one thinks this is someone who is able to act. He's able to take the initiative. He doesn't have to think things through too much. And I think that England, because he was originally Australian. I think he was still Australian. He was born in Perth, Australia, and he came to England. He went to art school, and the UK is a place where somehow Arieses do well in the United Kingdom. So if you're an Aries and you want to get noticed and you want to be successful, Britain is the place to come. Somehow they do well. I think it's maybe their spontaneity or something like that. So we see Aries. There's nothing particularly problematic about Aries. What else is in the chart? Okay, Mars in Pisces. Mars in Pisces can be a bit slippery. Pisces can have some strange ideas. It can just go with the flow in a rather disturbing way. If you've got Mars in Pisces, this is where you put your energy. Particularly if you're a man and you're born at night, the Mars may be just as important as the Sun. Interestingly, in his youth, he was a champion swimmer. At school, he was a brilliant swimmer. If you look him up on Wikipedia, you'll see him in his swimming gear. So maybe at some stage in his life, that's how the Mars in Pisces, was working. But where? Look at that chart. Where is anything particularly dubious in that chart? Well, what is the problem? Okay, let's try using 2020 hindsight. First thing to notice is his Jupiter. His Jupiter is in Gemini. Jupiter doesn't work very well in Gemini. Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius. So in Gemini, it finds it difficult to focus on the big vision. It can get caught up in details and get caught up in facts rather than the big picture. But that in itself doesn't explain anything too bad. Yet Jupiter is square Mars, and Jupiter square Mars can be difficult. Reason being, it doesn't know when to stop. Mars is energy, it's male sexuality, and it's square Jupiter. Where is the limit? Mars square Jupiter does not have any limit. So, of course, lots of people have Mars square Jupiter. In fact, Jimmy Savile, he was another British television personality, incredibly famous, national treasure, whatever. I don't think he didn't actually get arrested because by the time his truth about him came out, he was dead. But he also had Mars square Jupiter. So Mars square Jupiter may have something to do with sexuality that is out of control, that doesn't have any limits. There's Jupiter for you. We're told Jupiter is a wonderful planet. But of course, his Jupiter was in Gemini. Okay, so that's interesting. I should say, by the way, Jimmy Savile's Mars square Jupiter was actually quite wide. I think it had an orb of over 5 degrees. So it wasn't an exact Mars Jupiter square, it was. It was perhaps a common factor. What else? Well, if you look at his Mars, it is opposition Neptune. But again, it's a very wide opposition to Neptune. Okay, he's got Mars in the first house. He's got Neptune in the seventh house, because Pisces and Virgo are the opposite signs, and they've got but they're off. Neptune is at 1 Virgo, Mars is at 9 Pisces, so that is quite that's quite a wide orb. So orb, sorry, if you don't know the word orb is how out an aspect is. If there's 0 orb, it would mean that the opposition was exact. Here, the orb is around 8 degrees, so it's an incredibly wide opposition, which in itself probably doesn't mean much. Yet maybe there's something on the Mars-Neptune midpoint. So let's have a look. Is there anything on the Mars-Neptune midpoint? The Mars-Neptune midpoint is going to be about here, but perhaps there's something aspecting the Mars-Neptune midpoint. So if we look at Rolf Harris's midpoints, and we look at his Venus, he has actually got Venus on the Mars-Neptune midpoint. So Mars and Neptune may relate to strange ideas about relationships. I've talked about Mars Neptune as being about sleaze, being interested in things that are somewhat unsavory. And then you put Neptune there, but you put Venus there, and that might actually be saying something about how the person relates to other people. Maybe it's a Venus on the Mars Neptune that might have encouraged him to get involved with, or do whatever he did with these teenage underage girls. What maybe. So what does that mean, Venus aspecting the Mars-Neptune midpoint? So I'm going to go to Combination of Stellar Influences, Reinhold Ebertin's great book. So what does it mean? What does he say about Venus on the Mars-Neptune midpoint? So he says, wrong ideas about love relationship, peculiar expressions of feeling in love, a lack of procreative energy, misdirected passion, the misuse of the procreative powers, perversions. I think that's pretty good. There are lots of midpoints, but I think the reason that Venus on the Mars-Neptune midpoint is important, it's because that Mars and Neptune are opposition each other. Yeah, it may be a wide opposition, but when we see a wide opposition like that, it may be important if we can find another point, another planet on the midpoint. Now, one thing I should say about midpoints is that you can see that he's got Mercury exactly on the Sun-Moon midpoint. And I kind of want to echo what astrologer Charles Harvey says about the Sun-Moon midpoint. He took the view that if you have a planet on the Sun-Moon midpoint, that planet becomes incredibly prominent, and the example he liked to use. I'm afraid Charles Harvey is dead now, but I think he died in 2000. But the example he liked to use was Janis Joplin, who had Jupiter on the Sun-Moon midpoint. And he said, if you didn't see the Jupiter on the Sun-Moon midpoint, you wouldn't really be able to properly understand Janis Joplin's chart and all her, super hypermost or whatever she described herself as. That she was a real Jupiter person, but you couldn't see that unless you looked at the Sun-Moon midpoint. And here with Rolf Harris, he had Mercury on the Sun-Moon midpoint. Mercury is about communication. He was a very communicative person through his art, through his TV, through his music. Pure Mercury in Aries, able to really express himself. So I thought I'd just make that point. Always look at the Sun-Moon midpoint and see if there's a planet on it, because it really does. It really does matter. So there are a few things to note about Rolf Harris's chart, but nothing is nothing is. It was really set in stone. I don't think you could have really told from his chart that he had this dark and secret life. I don't think you would have seen it. Now, as far as when it all unravelled, he was arrested on March the 28th, 2013. And I want to show you the chart of his arrest, because it is actually quite amazing. It's almost one of those charts that you can use if you want to try to show that astrology works. So here we go. So here's the bi-wheel. Inside you have got Rolf Harris's chart. On the outside you've got the chart when he was arrested. I don't know what time he was arrested, but it was March 28, 2013. And there is his sun at 8:22 Aries, and Uranus was at 8:27 Aries. So he got arrested pretty much on the very close to the time of his Uranus exactly hitting his sun, and he had in his natal chart a Sun-Uranus conjunction anyway. So with someone who has Sun-Uranus conjunction, which is the shock, the ability to create surprises, the ability to be spontaneous, someone who has a Sun-Uranus conjunction in his chart is going to be really vulnerable to the sun. He's going to be really vulnerable to Uranus hitting the sun. In fact, when he was arrested, there was a Sun-Uranus conjunction, and he had a Sun-Uranus conjunction in his natal chart, and this Sun-Uranus conjunction was exactly on his Sun-Uranus conjunction. So what better symbolism for a massive shock? Suddenly getting arrested. Okay, I don't know the details. Maybe he had warning. Maybe he knew it was going to happen. But that was a moment. That was kind of a moment where the public saw that Rolf Harris had been arrested. That was when the whole thing crumbled. And I do think that is quite impressive. Further, we see that Mercury was on his Mars, and Mercury was squared Jupiter, and there's Jupiter. There's Jupiter when he was arrested, 11:17 Gemini, and his Jupiter was 11:22 Gemini. So he got arrested on his Jupiter return. I mean, that is really amazing. And it reinforces my point that Jupiter isn't always a good thing. You can't always expect wonderful things to happen when Jupiter makes a transit. So he has his Jupiter return and his whole life collapses. Is that what you expect? Jupiter expands and explodes what's already there. And of course, Jupiter is, in his chart, is in its detriment. So probably when you've got Jupiter in its detriment and Jupiter and that's transited by Jupiter, that may indicate that you can't necessarily expect good things to happen when you have a Jupiter return and you've got Jupiter in Gemini. And Jupiter would have just made a square to his Mars. And so I think that provides a little bit of evidence, particularly as Mercury conjunct his Mars, Jupiter conjunct his Jupiter. That, to my mind, suggests to me that in terms of astrology and what made him do what he did, may have had something to do with Mars square Jupiter. He couldn't control himself. He didn't know when to stop, and I suppose you could link that with the mythology of Jupiter. Jupiter was a very promiscuous influence. It was a god who, was quite associated with rape and that kind of thing. And so maybe that is how how it was working in his chart. Plus Aries, Aries just wants to act, do stuff, and it doesn't really know when. Doesn't know when to stop. And with that Mars Jupiter, with that Mars Jupiter, I think that is some kind of explanation. So yeah, I did want to say something about Rolf Harris's chart. I could go on for quite a long time about it, but I think I'll switch now to today's astrology, and today is May the 25th, 2023, and it's a Thursday. So what's going on? Well, like yesterday, the moon is in Leo. The moon is square Mercury. You'll see Mercury is at 9 Taurus, moon is at 12 Leo. So there's a bit of agitation there, particularly verbal agitation. You know, Mercury is a verbal planet. Moon square Mercury, it's how we communicate, and we communicate probably not in a very effective way. Yeah, we want things our way. We're quite stubborn, and when we try to tell people what we want, we could come over as being very clumsy. You know, we say the first thing that comes into our head. It seems right at the time, but then it's quite clear it's not right at all. So if in doubt, it's probably a good idea to keep quiet. But on a positive note, Venus is at 1913 Cancer, and it's starting to make a sextile to Uranus. So that might indicate interesting and surprising encounters. So, we might meet someone unexpectedly, and it might have some amazing results. So I'm not suggesting you be a complete hermit. Just be careful what you say, but be open to new contacts and new relationships, especially as the Sun and Venus are aspecting the Jupiter-Cupido midpoint. So what's Jupiter-Cupido about? Jupiter is about good fortune. Cupido is a hypothetical planet which is about union. It's about people coming together, people celebrating their togetherness, sometimes related to marriage. And so with the Sun and Venus hitting the Jupiter-Cupido midpoint, there's a possibility of some really important unions and contacts today. So if there's a chance to meet someone special, or to meet someone who you've been desperate to get hold of for days, weeks, months, years, now might be the time to do it. So overall, it needn't be a bad day, but we just have to be careful what we say, and if we have any doubts, we should probably keep it to ourselves. Now, as far as the I Ching is concerned, as usual, I threw the coins in the air and I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like for visitors to my YouTube channel? And I'm afraid I got hexagram number 47, exhaustion. The symbolism of hexagram number 47 is a lake, and underneath the lake is an abyss. So what that means is that the lake is draining. That's quite interesting, because today I was draining a pond. I was siphoning out the water from it. I don't know, but I wasn't doing it. I'm not going to do that tomorrow. Anyway, so we haven't got much energy. It's going to be really easy to exhaust ourselves today. So it's important not to take on too much. And when dealing with other people, just don't give too much away, particularly emotionally. So don't allow other people to talk too much on the phone, for example, or to burden you with their problems, because they won't know when to stop. And in the end, we're going to feel really drained. So all I'm saying is just look after yourself and conserve your energy. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say for today. And I will talk to you tomorrow.